I'm going to be using the Sean Dorney Grant to do some in-depth reporting on tribal violence in PNG's highlands. It's an ongoing issue in parts of that region, and it affects thousands of people. It's not just people who may be killed in the violence, but also families, villages that get displaced. It can be thousands of people who get displaced or have problems with food security because they might lose access to crops. So it's a significant issue that PNG is trying to resolve and overcome. It's also an issue that draws a lot of international attention. Unfortunately, those sort of headline figures when there is a massacre and several people are killed, that's what often makes international headlines about PNG. And that's understandable. It's a significant issue that needs to be covered, but it's also a bit disappointing in terms of people's understanding and perceptions of PNG. And the reason I say that is because so often the reporting is quite shallow and reactionary. It's just that headline figure. So I want to get on the ground to meet people, to give context to this, to look at what issues are contributing to it, what impacts it's having, to have people on the ground tell their own stories, and to also look at the people who are working really hard to try to build peace and what's working in that regard and what still needs to be done. So it can actually be very expensive to get to these areas and to spend time on the ground. You know, they can be quite remote places to get to, and I really want to be able to make multiple trips so that I can build trust and build relationships so that people feel comfortable, you know, telling their own story. So the grant is going to allow me to do all of that. You know, the contribution of $10,000 from this grant is really going to make that possible. And the costs associated with doing this kind of in-depth reporting is also a big issue for the local media here in PNG. So I'm really hoping that I'll be able to work in with local media as part of this storytelling so that we can work together and you know, hopefully produce some content for both of us. I do think one of the challenges is just that relationship building and trust building so that people do feel confident to tell their own story and so that the right voices are given a chance to have their say. There's also issues, obviously these being remote areas, communication can sometimes be unreliable or be difficult. You know, people could be moving around if they have been affected by tribal fighting in the recent past. And obviously also, you know, these can be volatile situations. Things can change on the ground quite quickly. So they're all challenges that are going to need to be overcome in the reporting. This is our backyard, and I think Australia and the Australian public, you know, should care more about it and be more interested in it. I think so often we still turn to the US or to Europe when we're looking at international news. So it would be great to see people, you know, reading more about, hearing more about stories from the countries that are closest to them. This is an incredible region, and I think that applies to both, you know, looking at issues of concern in the Pacific, but also celebrating good news coming out of the Pacific. I'd love to see Australians engaging with both more. You know, I do think people in Australia should care about the fact that 4 kilometres from their border, you know, there's a country, PNG, that, you know, only 13% of the population has access to reliable electricity. Or, you know, where there's such incredible differences in health outcomes and access to education. I think that's something that should concern Australians and they should want to know more about. And, you know, we have seen a shift, I think, in politics in Australia of turning more attention to this region. So I hope that public sentiment and public interest follows that. And I also think, you know, while there are those issues of concern that Australians, I hope, would want to learn more about, I'd also like to see us get away from some of the stereotypes of what people might think about these countries to also, you know, be seeing more of just the incredible culture such diversity in culture in PNG and the rest of the Pacific, and there are people doing amazing things. So it'd be nice to be seeing more of that in the Australian media. I think while there are some Australians who are engaged with what's happening in the Pacific, there's just so many people here that are so aware of what's happening in Australia and who have such a fondness for Australia that it would be good if we could see a bit more of that returned.